It begins with a quiet morning. The coffee is hot. The thermostat hums in the background. The refrigerator is full. You step out onto your porch and breathe in the crisp air of absolute, unbroken modern convenience. But then, the trucks stop. A grid failure. A sudden geopolitical shock. A localized supply chain collapse. It does not matter what the trigger is. Within 3 hours, the grocery store shelves are stripped bare. The frozen foods thaw into a rotting mess. The illusion of eternal plenty shatters, leaving you staring at a manicured green lawn that produces absolutely nothing of value. This is the central conflict of our time, the fragile modern convenience we worship, versus the unbreakable ancestral continuity we abandoned. 75 years ago, governments did not hide this vulnerability from their citizens. During the Second World War, they looked the public in the eye and told them a very uncomfortable truth. They told them that if they did not turn their backyards into biological engines of survival, they would starve. They mandated the planting of specific, indestructible crops. Today, we are going to resurrect that lost blueprint. We are going to count down the 15 crops governments practically forced citizens to grow. As we move closer to the top of this list, the stakes will rise. You will discover that number 3 was treated not as food, but as a heavily guarded wartime asset. And you will learn why number 1 quietly generated household wealth with zero labor, becoming the ultimate insurance policy for generations of pioneers. By the end of this journey, you will possess the exact knowledge to transform your useless suburban grass into an economic fortress. 15. The peasant's anchor. The radish. When a nation goes to war, or when a family faces sudden economic devastation, the first casualty is morale. When you look at an empty patch of dirt, the human mind struggles to believe that life will come from it in time to save them. During the rationing programs of the 1940s, the government knew that new gardeners needed an immediate psychological victory. The radish is a biological miracle of speed. From the moment you place that tiny, unremarkable seed into cold, unforgiving spring soil, the clock starts. In just 25 to 30 days, you are pulling bright, crisp, peppery food from the earth. Historically, this was the peasant's anchor. In the monastic gardens of medieval Europe and the muddy trench-side plots of the world wars, the radish proved that the earth had not forsaken them. It grows in poor soil. It shrugs off a light freeze. It asks for nothing and gives everything. It is not about vast calories. It is about momentum. It is the immediate proof of life that keeps a family digging when the world feels dark. But morale alone will not sustain your biology when the meat counter is empty. You need something that bleeds iron and refuses to die. 14. The cut-and-come-again iron. Swiss chard. Imagine a winter so brutal that the ground cracks. Imagine a summer so punishing that the grass turns to dust. Through it all, a thick, leathery leaf stands upright, defying the sky. Swiss chard was a mandatory inclusion in government survival gardens because it possesses a relentless biological immortality. During the Great Depression, and through the rationing of the subsequent wars, families needed nutrition that did not require constant replanting. Swiss chard is a cut-and-come-again crop. You take a knife, shear off the outer leaves for your dinner, and the plant simply pushes out new growth from the center. It does this for months on end. Let us talk about the brutal economic conversion. A single packet of heirloom Swiss chard seeds costs roughly $2. If you plant a modest 10-foot row, that $2 investment will yield continuous, nutrient-dense greens for up to 9 months depending on your climate. To buy that equivalent volume of organic greens at a modern grocery store would easily cost you $250 over the season. That is not just gardening. That is an aggressive, inflation-shielding return on investment. Yet greens cannot sustain you through a dark, freezing winter on their own. You need something heavy, something that hides in the dark. 13. The winter cellar guardian. The turnip. Before the potato conquered the European continent, it was the humble turnip that stood between humanity and absolute starvation. When British and American victory garden campaigns launched, the turnip was heavily pushed in propaganda posters. Why? Because it is the ultimate insurance policy against the cold. The turnip thrives as the days grow short and the frost begins to bite. When pioneer families faced the sprawling, silent menace of an approaching winter, they relied on this dense, purple-shouldered root. You do not need a refrigerator. You do not need electricity. You pull them from the cold earth, brush off the dirt, and toss them into a dark, cool cellar. They will sit there, patiently holding onto their calories and hydration for months. They are heavy. They are filling. They trick the stomach into feeling full when bread is scarce. They were the silent guardian of the winter cellar, ensuring that when February brought howling winds and empty pantries, there was still a stew boiling on the hearth. But a stew requires substance. It requires the building blocks of human muscle. 12. The nitrogen protein factory. Bush beans. During the global conflicts of the 20th century, meat was strictly rationed. The military needed the beef and the pork for the soldiers bleeding on foreign soil. The civilians left behind were handed a coupon book and told to figure it out. They figured it out by planting beans. The bush bean is an absolute marvel of survival biology. It does not just take from the soil, it gives back. Through a symbiotic relationship with bacteria on its roots, it pulls raw nitrogen out of the atmosphere and fixes it into the earth. It is a self-fertilizing engine. More importantly, it is an economic powerhouse for your pantry. Let us look at the math. A 100-foot row of bush beans can comfortably yield 120 pounds of fresh pods. If you take those pods and run them through a pressure canner, you have secured roughly 100 quarts of dense, shelf-stable plant protein. To buy 100 large jars of premium organic beans today would cost you well over $300. You print that money in your backyard with a $5 bag of seeds and a weekend of labor. They sit on your shelf, requiring no power, waiting decades if necessary to feed your family. And as the summer heat fades and the dangerous chill returns, you need a crop that thrives in the freeze. 11. The cold weather blood builder. Spinach. Spinach is a survivor. While the fragile summer crops wither and collapse at the first kiss of frost, spinach actually grows sweeter. The plant responds to freezing temperatures by producing natural sugars to protect its cellular walls from bursting. When the government urged citizens to grow spinach, they were looking at the massive nutritional deficits caused by war. Children were pale. Energy levels were plummeting. Spinach was championed to replace the iron, folate, and trace minerals that a broken supply chain could no longer deliver. You can plant it in the dying days of autumn. You can cover it with a simple sheet of glass or plastic, and it will slowly, stubbornly continue to grow while the rest of the world is buried in snow. It is the green blood of the winter garden. But while spinach fortifies the blood, the human body under stress craves something else entirely. It craves energy. 10. The subterranean sugar supply. Carrots. During the bombing of London, the British government famously propagated a brilliant myth. They claimed their anti-aircraft gunners were eating massive quantities of carrots to give them night vision, explaining their sudden success at shooting down enemy bombers. It was a cover story to hide the invention of radar. But the side effect was a nationwide obsession with growing carrots. The truth is, carrots were desperately needed for a different reason. Sugar rationing was brutally strict. The importation of cane sugar was entirely halted by submarine warfare. The carrot, buried safely out of sight from aerial bombardment, became the primary source of natural sweetness for an entire generation. A carrot seed is roughly the size of a speck of dust. Yet, it reaches deep into heavily compacted soil, pulling up moisture, beta-carotene, and complex carbohydrates, swelling into a bright orange sphere of pure energy. It survives deep freezes. It stores beautifully in damp sand for the entire winter. It is a biological vault of energy. Energy is vital, but volume is what fills an empty, aching stomach. 9. The trench rations staple. Cabbage. There is a reason the cabbage has marched with armies since the days of the Roman Empire. There is a reason it was the undisputed king of the Great Depression and the Victory Garden. It is a heavyweight champion of caloric density. A single cabbage plant can produce a dense, tightly wound head weighing upwards of 20 pounds. It requires very little space for the sheer mass it produces. But the true magic of cabbage, and the reason governments begged citizens to grow it, is its relationship with preservation. When you slice a cabbage, salt it, and press it into a ceramic crock, something mystical happens. You are not just preserving food, you are unlocking ancestral gut health. Through lacto-fermentation, the cabbage transforms into sauerkraut. Let us apply the brutal economic conversion here. $4 in cabbage seeds can yield 200 pounds of dense vegetable mass. When fermented, that volume provides a family with a year's supply of probiotics and highly bioavailable vitamin C. To replicate that level of gut-fortifying nutrition through modern pharmaceutical supplements would cost a family over $400 a year. You achieve it with salt, dirt, and thyme. And right alongside the green mass of the cabbage, sits its bleeding red cousin. 8. The red vault of stamina. Beets. If there is one plant that embodies the grit of pioneer survival, it is the beet. The beet does not care if your soil is rocky. It does not care if the summer is a blazing inferno, or if the autumn brings bitter hail. It will ruthlessly expand its dark red root beneath the surface. During historical periods of deep rationing, beets were utilized from root to tip. The tops provided a nutrient-dense green comparable to Swiss chard. The root itself provided an intense, earthy sugar and carbohydrates. Modern clinical studies suggest the rich nitrates found in beets play a profound role in expanding blood vessels, effectively increasing human stamina and cardiovascular endurance. In a world where manual labor suddenly becomes mandatory for survival, cardiovascular endurance is the currency of life. Stop. Take a breath. Look around the room you are sitting in right now. We have placed our absolute faith in the barcode scanner. We trust that a truck driven by a stranger will arrive at a concrete building in the middle of the night, every single night, so that we can eat. We live under the illusion of the 3-day rule. Cities have exactly 3 days of food on hand at any given moment. What happens when an electromagnetic pulse drops the grid? What happens when a cyber attack paralyzes the shipping ports in November? The generation that lived through the 1940s survived because they had physical memory in their hands. They remembered how to manipulate dirt. We have amnesia. We have outsourced our most primal biological requirement to a fragile digital web. If that web snaps, you will not be able to eat your stock portfolio. You will not be able to swipe your card at an empty shelf. The adrenaline you feel right now is justified. It is your ancestral instinct waking up. It is warning you. Let us return to the blueprint of survival, because spring always follows the winter. 7. The early spring survival ration. Peas. When the winter stores are dangerously low, and the cellar is mostly empty, the homesteader looks desperately to the thawing earth. The ground is still too cold for the fragile summer crops, but it is not too cold for the pea. The pea is the vanguard of the spring garden. Governments encouraged its cultivation because it is one of the very few crops that can be planted while the threat of snow still looms. The seeds lie dormant, waiting for the exact biological moment to crack open and push toward the weak spring sun. In a true survival scenario, peas are the bridge. They span the deadly gap between the end of your winter food stores and the arrival of the summer harvest. They provide an immediate, critical burst of plant protein and vital nutrients, right when the human body is most depleted from the dark months. But as the days grow longer and the sun finally blazes overhead, we arrive at the most heavily championed fruit of the war. 6. The ascorbic acid asset. Tomatoes. In almost every piece of World War II gardening literature, the tomato sits front and center. It was not just recommended, it was practically mandated. The reason was entirely chemical. Scurvy was a ghost that haunted blockaded nations. The lack of vitamin C led to the breakdown of collagen, the bleeding of gums, and eventual death. With citrus fruits completely cut off by disrupted trade routes, the population needed a localized replacement. The tomato was the answer. It is an aggressively productive vine. Let us look at the financial logic. A family can purchase 5 heirloom tomato plants for roughly $15. Placed in full sun and watered deeply, those 5 plants can easily produce over 100 pounds of fruit. When you boil those tomatoes down and water bath can them, you secure roughly 40 thick quarts of nutrient-dense sauce and paste. To purchase 40 jars of high-quality organic pasta sauce today would drain $300 from your bank account. The tomato is a relentless inflation shield that defends your immune system, but the tomato is delicate. It crushes. It rots if not processed. You need a calorie source that is armored. 5. The hard-shelled, calorie-safe. Winter squash. The pioneers crossing the Great Plains of America did not have glass jars. They did not have pressure canners. They needed food that preserved itself through the sheer architecture of its biology. They relied on winter squash. Whether it is the butternut, the Hubbard, or the acorn squash, these plants are creeping giants. They sprawl across the earth, choking out weeds and pumping enormous amounts of water and carbohydrates into hard, armored shells. When the vines die back in the autumn frost, they leave behind biological vaults. You do not need to can them, you do not need to freeze them. You simply cut them from the dead vine, cure them in the sun for a few days, and place them on a shelf. A single healthy butternut vine can yield 60 pounds of dense, sweet, orange flesh. That is 60 pounds of food that costs you 0 electricity to store. It will sit patiently in a dark corner for up to 8 months, laughing at the winter cold, waiting to be split open and roasted when you need it most. But while the squash sits quietly on a shelf keeping your family fed, you will still need defense. You will need protection against invisible enemies. 4. The antibacterial bulwark. Onions. The onion is not just a flavor base. It is a historical fortress against decay. Since the days of the Egyptian pharaohs, the onion has been utilized to preserve other foods and protect the human gut. During the rationing eras, meals were often monotonous. They were bland, repetitive, and uninspiring. The onion provided the intense, savory depth that made survival rations palatable. But its true power lies in its deep storing capability and its sulfur compounds. The onion cures in the open air, tightening its papery skin into a moisture-proof barrier. You can braid the tops and hang them from the rafters of a barn or a basement. They swing there in the dark, a sharp, pungent reserve of intense flavor and historical utility. Yet, as potent as the onion is, it bows to the medicinal authority of our next crop. You can survive a winter on roots. You can fill your stomach with squash. But what happens when the supply chain cuts off your medicine? That brings us to number 3. 3. The wartime apothecary asset. Garlic. During the chaos of the Second World War, specifically on the Eastern Front, conventional supply lines were frequently bombed into dust. There were no shipments of pharmaceuticals making it through the snow and the artillery fire. The Russian army faced an invisible enemy as deadly as the bullets: widespread infection. To combat this, the government turned to a crop so potent it was treated as a strategic military asset. They turned to garlic. It became widely known as Russian penicillin. Garlic is a ruthless, unkillable perennial. You plant the cloves in the freezing dirt of October. They sleep under the snow, silently building a deep root system. When spring arrives, they erupt into the sunlight. We must be careful with our words, but history is undeniable. Historical apothecary texts are filled with references to garlic as a frontline defense against internal and external biological threats. Modern clinical studies suggest its active compound, allicin, which is released only when the clove is crushed, plays a profound role in maintaining human vitality and supporting natural immune responses. It takes up almost zero space in the garden, yet it yields a harvest that acts as a potent, natural insurance policy for your family's physical resilience. But medicine alone cannot fuel the heavy labor of survival. You need a dense, deep earth carbohydrate. 2. The Deep South insurance policy, sweet potatoes. While the northern climates relied on the hard-shelled squashes, the southern homesteaders and victory gardeners turned to a tropical vine that thrives in punishing, relentless heat. The sweet potato. This is not a traditional potato. It is a morning glory vine that aggressively covers the soil, creating a living mulch that protects the earth from baking under the July sun. Beneath the surface, it swells into massive, sugary tubers that are packed with dense calories and monumental levels of vitamin A. During the Great Depression, when cash simply evaporated from the rural economy, the sweet potato kept the South alive. It thrives in poor, sandy soil where other crops would wither and die. It requires almost zero fertilization. You take one single sweet potato from the grocery store, suspend it in a jar of water, and it will produce dozens of green shoots called slips. Those slips, planted in the dirt, will each yield a cluster of massive tubers. A $3 investment in one organic sweet potato can literally produce hundreds of pounds of high-calorie food in a single season. It is a compounding biological interest account. And now, we arrive at the apex. The undisputed king of the survival garden. The crop we teased at the very beginning. 1. The underground gold standard. Potatoes. The potato did not just support civilizations, it built them. And when it failed, it destroyed them. During the Victory Garden campaigns of the 1940s, the potato was the ultimate, non-negotiable anchor of the backyard plot. It is the crop that quietly generated household wealth with zero labor. Let us examine the brutal, undeniable math of the potato. If you invest $10 into 10 pounds of high-quality seed potatoes, you can cut them into pieces, ensuring each piece has an eye. You bury those pieces in the dirt. You pile straw or soil over the green leaves as they grow. That is the entirety of the labor. Underground, hidden from pests, hidden from the blazing sun, and hidden from the chaotic world above, those 10 pounds of seed will multiply into 150 pounds of dense, pure carbohydrates. To buy 150 pounds of organic, pesticide-free potatoes at a modern grocery store would cost you roughly $300. Your $10 bill is converted into $300 of biological gold, safely banked beneath the soil. The potato sustains life. It is filling, it is incredibly nutrient-dense, and it requires no specialized equipment to harvest. You simply plunge your hands into the cold autumn earth and pull out survival. It is the unbreakable backbone of generational continuity. We have just walked through the 15 crops that stood between our ancestors and the abyss. But a list of plants is just trivia if you do not have a master plan. You must not just plant randomly. You must build what I call a decentralized biological grid. It requires a 4-step framework. Step 1 is fast wins. This is your morale. You must carve out a space for radishes, spinach, and bush beans. You need immediate proof that the system works to keep your family invested in the labor. Step 2 is calorie anchors. This is your security. You dedicate the largest square footage of your property to the heavyweights, the potatoes, the winter squash, and the cabbages. These are the crops that will actually keep you alive when the grocery store doors are locked. Step 3 is perennials. This is your insurance. You must establish crops that you plant only once. Asparagus, walking onions, rhubarb, and fruit bushes. These are the engines that wake up every single spring and produce food without you having to lift a shovel or buy a seed. Step 4 is legacy. This is your medicine and your deep future. You plant the garlic. You plant the heavy nut trees. You build the apothecary assets that your children and your grandchildren will harvest long after you are gone. Pause. Think about the choice sitting in front of you right now. You can close this application, walk into your kitchen, and continue to trust the barcode scanner. You can remain completely dependent on a fragile, vibrating web of global supply chains that are currently fraying at the edges. Or you can step outside, look at your useless grass, and decide to secede from the system. Are you team convenience? Or are you team continuity? If you are ready to choose continuity, if you want to discover the exact perennial crops you can plant one time and harvest for the next 25 years, click the video on your screen right now, because the trucks will not run forever, and the earth is waiting for you to remember.